Welcome to Discover Indie Film. I've got my guest, Jim Vendiola, with me. Hey, Jim.
Hey, happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. So, early disclaimer is that we're on Zoom. You're in Chicago. I'm in Los Angeles. So, you didn't drive over for the interview. And the reason I mentioned Zoom is because if you have a problem with the audio quality, or if it sounds like Jim and I speak over each other, it's actually just because there's a micro delay with Zoom. You know, we're covering half the continent here. So my apologies, but don't be mad at Jim and I for the quality of our audio. You know, we're using Zoom. So anyway, that's my first part of my preamble. The other part is to mention Jim is on this podcast because your film, Pretty Pickle, was an official selection at Film Invasion Los Angeles in 2023. And by the way, amusingly, I'll share with you, I was sure we would have shown it this year. Like, it's still that present in my mind, like that screening of your film, seeing it on the 65-foot screen. I don't know. I'm surprised it's been a year and a half since I met you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I agree. I definitely was bummed to miss it in person, but I do appreciate any time someone mentions that it has that kind of staying power, or at least is that level of haunting for anyone who's seen it.
For sure. And or haunting and just feels current and relevant. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it was a long time ago. And I'm going to add that you did get the award. I know people don't make films with awards in mind, but our Filmmakers Board, which is a jury of all filmmakers who had films at our festivals in the past, so it's a jury of your peers, gave Pretty Pickle Outstanding Screenplay Horror. So for you, because you were the writer and director of the film, so bravo, golf clap. Amusingly, I can guarantee you, no matter what, a film as good as yours was going to get an award, because I do have a failsafe, which is the Programmer's Prize. I don't have to put my finger on the scale for the other awards, because if I have to, I just say, well, the juries weren't smart enough to give Pretty Pickle an award, but they were. But if they hadn't been smart enough to give you an award for screenwriting, you would have gotten Programmer's Prize for exceptional filmmaking, because it's just an exceptional film, and it would have gotten that one. But what can I say? I like letting you know.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think as filmmakers, everyone knows our films are only as good as the team behind us. So, I definitely have all of them to thank.
Yeah, you have a good team, including actually one of your producers is a veteran of Sherman Oaks Film Festival and Film Invasion LA, Curtis Motzke. But it's just a great film, and I'll add, people can check it out if they go to the Indie Channel, which I might be a little biased, but I think everyone should subscribe to the Indie Channel. Just go to indiechannel.tv, or if you are a smart TV kind of person, if you have Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, or Android TV, it's also on smartphone. But if you just download the app, the Indie Channel, you can check out a streaming service that's all about the kind of independent films that a lot of people aren't interested in distributing, and or, I don't know where to go with it, but it's an ambitious socialist little experiment, the Indie Channel, where all the filmmakers who contribute to it share evenly, regardless of clicks, views, completions. We just believe that art is art, and everyone contributing art to the Indie Channel shares evenly in the proceeds. So, I'm crossing my fingers on the Zoom camera, but only Jim gets to see that. But but it is my sincerest hope that I am one of the co-founders of the Indie Channel, and I'm hoping that the Indie Channel can really, now I'll just jump back to you. I mean, Pretty Pickle is a well-made, well-shot. Everything about this film is good. But as we were discussing before, it challenges its audience in a way that makes some people uncomfortable. And, not all distribution channels will touch a film that challenges their audiences.
Yeah, no, for sure. And what I like about your programming and selection style is it almost feels like kind of a film that's near and dear to me too. Like it's almost like the outsiders of streaming services, right? You got these rough and tumble, likable but still like subversive things going on. So
I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're certainly outsiders.
yeah.
And as far as I can tell, it does. Well, I shouldn't mention them, but I keep getting emails as a festival programmer about apparently other people have the idea of distributing, trying to get indie films in front of more eyeballs, but others aren't interested. They don't seem interested in curation and quality. They just seem to be, you know, let alone. But anyway, that's my mentioning of the indie channel. Now we'll get into you and your film. As I warned you, this podcast is really as much about you as your film because I think that independent filmmakers, people like yourself who write a screenplay and look at it and say, you know what, I'm going to put my, I mean, I feel like you're putting your heart on the line when you follow through and make a film, make an independent film, make a short, take it on the festival circuit. I really feel like you're hanging your heart out there and you're putting your quite literally putting your money where your mouth is, right, as an artist. And I feel like people like yourself don't get enough rewards for doing that. So as much as I love our long Q&As at the film festivals, you know, and in your case, we did our Q&A through Zoom for Film Invasion Los Angeles, but most people are in the theater and, you know, I get to talk to the person for like 5 minutes before we hand it off to the audience and they start asking questions that I wish they wouldn't. So
Yeah, no, I can tell you what camera I shot it with or my DP shot it with, but like, who cares?
who cares? You know, don't ask, it's funny whenever someone asks about budget, they say, you know, or they, you know, or sometimes my least favorite, and this would not happen to you with Pretty Pickle, is when someone goes, did you see the episode of Black Mirror or X happened? It's kind of like your film, right? And I'm like, why are you insulting this person? I'm sure they wrote it before Black Mirror released.
Yeah.
Like, you know, no, but I don't think anyone will ever say to you, oh, did you get the idea for Pretty Pickle from that that thing I saw on TV? No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, certainly not.
Well, so before I ask you like Pretty Pickle questions, I warned you that the question is what sparked you to go into the creative arts in the first place? Did it happen as a kid? Did it develop over time?
Yeah, I'm what do they describe me as? The At my age, I am the youngest Gen Xer and oldest millennial, which is to say that I came of age in the mid 90s and that was really influential because I grew up as a kid in South Florida having really only access to films that were in the multiplex, these big tent poles and these summer blockbusters. And it wasn't until, I was like around 14 that I started getting access to like independent films during that sort of like, second wave of or third wave of like really cool American independent cinema, but at the same time, through like the Sundance Channel and the Independent Film Channel, also like getting really much easier access to like world cinema. And so I really didn't know, what I wanted to be, quote unquote, when I grew up, but like seeing that and seeing how those films were so much more personal and also made on smaller budgets and kind of a lot of those films taking place in a more realistic or even neo-realistic fashion, it really like showed me that these films were made by actual people. And not only that like I could actually make something like this, like even this is such a cliche answer, but like I saw Pulp Fiction on opening night in the theater and the crowd was insane. And that movie like blew my mind. You know, I was just like, I've never heard dialogue like this. Why are people having these kinds of conversations and like using the kind of language, you know, that they do, you know, these characters like being dirtbags and stuff, like these anti-heroes and that kind of thing. And just all of the early Tarantino stuff, same thing with like Reservoir Dogs, you know, but at the same time, you know, like Clerks was equally subversive, and you could tell that movie was made for so little money, even though I had no concept of like budgeting or financing or how much like a movie cost. And then the flip, like, you know, on the other hand, I saw Danny Boyle's first film, Shallow Grave, when I was 15, and that blew me away too. And speaking of like, you know, a non-domestic title that was a small film with such big impact and impact on me personally, like, you know, it really not only inspired me in a way where it's just like the story is so simple and it goes in such unpredictable directions, and also it still has like one of my favorite endings of all time, but like it also really pushed me to pursue and kind of consume things that had like a little bit more of a macabre side, like, you know, the idea of just like, what do you do with a dead body and a suitcase of money? It's like a very 90s subject that was like, you know, subsequently done poorly, like over and over and over again. But when I saw Shallow Grave, I was just like, Jesus Christ, like this is like so cool and so cerebral, but also like so messed up. But also there was a whimsy to it, and Danny Boyle's like sense of humor that he would then like expand on in something like Train Spotting, you know, before he was like this huge like studio darling. It's just like it really sort of left an impression on me.
And were you before? And that I totally get how that was a really special era, I think, of cinema. But before that, were you a creative kid? Were you writing stories? Were you interested in other
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah, I was definitely, you know, in terms of scholastic archetypes, I was definitely more of the art nerd than any kind of athlete or anything, you know. And it was you know, not an entirely isolating thing, but you know, when you go to school in like South Florida and you know, there's a lot of like homogenous ideas and like the sort of need to conform is prioritized in a lot of ways when you're trying to self-actualize and like, you know, make friends and fit in and all that. Like it was a weird spot to be in because it was always just like myself and like maybe one other kid who were like the artistic kids. And so I was always a pretty good illustrator. I got into comic books. Like when I was younger, I thought I like wanted to illustrate comic books, and like, you know, I'd read Wizard magazine, and like, you know, my buddy and I got really into like drawing comics, and like um you know, I did think movies were cool. I always loved movies, and like thankfully like my siblings would love similar movies, so we never had to really like fight over changing the channel. But like it really was my dad who had like a taste for interesting cinema and would just like rattle off facts. And so even though it wasn't until I like could choose the own things the you know, the things I wanted to watch for myself, like as a teenager, you know, he was always like introducing us to other things that like I tried to talk about at school that like other kids hadn't seen, because, you know, I was like, he took me to see Cobra when I was 6 years old, and that movie's like terrifying and insane and totally bloody. It's such a hard R, you know. But at the same time, like he showed me and my brother The Warriors when like I was 10, and I'm like, that movie is still one of my favorite movies. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what you're saying about South Florida too is you didn't have like a local art house for kids to, you know, for the artistic kids to be drawn to. But I also wanted to add that, I mean, I am in no way the first person to ever make the connection. but comic books and graphic novels are a direct line to cinema because they're storyboards. I mean, it's literally story. Like you're when you go from that to cinema, I mean, comic books are make such great movies because they're already storyboarded.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the thing that was a sort of maybe non apparent, but still like very logical in hindsight trajectory for me was being in love with comic books and the sort of like visual storytelling of that. Like when it came time for me to actually like try my hand at making films or dabbling in that, I did not go to film school because I went to Florida State, and Florida State is a renowned but also very exclusive film school. They only accept 15 kids a year. So after getting rejected a couple times, I ended up in the art program doing like graphic design and photography. And so really I was able to develop my sort of like visual storytelling, like at least the kernels, the early kernels of it, and sort of like at the same time not have such a rigorous production slash technical schedule of film school. So, you know, I ended up like doing a lot of drugs, smoking a lot of weed, dropping a lot of acid, and also watching a lot of like interesting cinema with like friends. And yeah, I mean, that whole period for me was very critical because I didn't have the really harsh parameters of a film school, and I really got to explore like, yeah, what aesthetic meant to me, and sort of like develop my tastes, and you know, not necessarily be shown canonical films that are like quote unquote good films versus like lowbrow or middlebrow. Like I got to watch it all whenever I wanted, you know, under, you know, different lenses, like I said, under the influence of like psychedelics or anything like that, or even sober. I got to sort of, you know, choose a little bit more what I consumed and like how I consumed it, and what I got out of it.
And that was an era where home video was still going strong, right? So if you there's something you appreciated, I still you know whatever we all have a little bit of fondness if we lived in that era that you could rent a VHS or DVD and watch it more than once during that weekend, right? Because you'd watch it and be like, oh man, these other friends should see this, like it was but you in theory got to. I appreciate how you got more control over, not control, but you were able to curate for yourself in a way, your
Yeah,
cinematic input.
for sure. And like there really was a very cool element to it where there would be this pursuit, right? You'd hear rumblings about something in an AOL chat room, and like my first copy of Eraserhead, I had to drop $45 on eBay for a third generation VHS transfer. It had Japanese subtitles. It was barely watchable, but so fascinating, you know? And then I literally ordered Pink Flamingos out of like a paper bound catalog from like a weird, you know, purveyor of cinema and gadgets, and that kind of like counterculture catalog that like you would get through the mail back in the day. So
And I'm just curious. I have so many questions I could ask, but I just have to mention like, uh, well, did FSU show films on campus too that were interesting, or is that something that wouldn't happen? Because I have to share that when I was a freshman in college, and I am dating myself here, like Blue Velvet was released. and
and I am very envious of you because Blue Velvet blew me away.
and it actually played in the big hall on campus because you know, like a 300 500 seat lecture hall. I got to see a film print of Blue Velvet in like winter 86 on campus, and it was, you know, it was amazing. And but I don't know if FSU is the kind of university that brings that stuff onto campus or not.
No, that's incredible because I also saw Blue Velvet on VHS when I was about 15 or 16. Blew me away. Didn't really quite know how to wrap my head around, especially like the aggressive kink component, but also knew it was something that like, God, where has this movie been all my life? Like, it's a detective story, and I'm kind of familiar with a certain kind of detective story, but like, not this kind of psychosexual, like, suburban Americana nightmare, you know? Um, and yeah, thankfully, we did have a, I forget what it was called when I was there, but we did have a cinema on campus that maybe wasn't 500 seats. It was a little smaller, but it was cool because they did show really interesting movies there. And I remember some night it was just like me and my two nerdy outcast friends would sometimes be like the only three kids in the theater, you know? And I saw like, God, what did I see there? I think I saw Darren Aronofsky's Pie there. I think I saw Buffalo 66 there. There was also an art house theater in Tallahassee. I don't know if it's still there, called Miracle 5, that showed similar programming. So we did have options, but Student Life, well, it would eventually be called the Student Life Center and move to a dedicated building. But the people that would show that kind of programming, it was cool too because it was free for students, obviously, so we could see, you know, a movie any night of the week, basically.
Oh, very cool. All right, so I know what kind of cinema inspired you. When did you when did you sit down and decide to start making some stuff? Was it while you were still in school you got the opportunity to get your hands on some equipment, or did you start writing some screenplays or
Yeah, I got my first like personal computer, like an NEC that probably had like, geez, it probably like had um 100 megabytes of, you know, memory, and like I can't imagine like the computing power on something like that. But I did have you know, I had Microsoft Word on it, and I would write my own screenplays, and not really show them to anybody in high school. You know, save them on like 3.5 like inch floppy disks. And it wasn't until, and they were, you know, they were so derivative, right? Like, you know, they were so just like, yeah, such a ripoff of things that I was consuming at the time. Like, I wrote a vampire script, you know, like all the dialogue was always like, so like, you know, third tier, like Kevin Smith, like, you know, I'm like 15, I'm gonna be vulgar, and like I think I'm witty doing it, you know, like really like edgelord type shit. But it wasn't until I think I was like a senior in high school that I actually like printed one out and showed my friends, and I think it was like this 17-page short, and it ended up getting like passed around unbeknownst to me, and like people would just like bring it up in class, like, and it wasn't until I think the second week my senior year before graduation that the like drama teacher was like, you should have like been in my class this whole time. And I'm like, okay, cool, well, like that's a nice encouragement, even though like, you know, I probably wasted that opportunity, but you know, c'est la vie, you know, so it goes.
for sure. And there's nothing. Look, we all start off that way, right? I mean, every band starts out as a cover band of their favorite band, and then they find their own voice. So yeah, screenwriters, creatives, all do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you know, it wasn't until actually like during my undergrad that in earnest I attempted to make films, and thankfully I was able to do that in a more like classic fashion on 16 millimeter through New York Film Academy. Like, I spent like a summer in New York, I think, after my junior year or maybe after my sophomore year. Regardless, it was like the summer before 9/11. So I was in New York, I made like 4 16 millimeter films, and I'm glad they have never seen the light of day, and that I only have like one copy. But like it was a really cool sort of complement to what I was doing in art school, to actually then understand like crew roles and what the gear does and how to light and how to, attempt to direct actors at the time and that kind of thing.
Right. So
So
you
yeah.
sought out, I think you said during the summer, but in between years of college, you did seek out that New York Film Academy experience.
Yeah, and that's sort of like a pay to play type of environment, right? As long as you can like afford, or your parents for that matter can afford to sort of like pay the tuition for one of their programs and like, put you up in New York for like X amount of time and like pay for your, 16 millimeter film at the time, like anybody could really go. And so that was interesting too, because you had like all these people at various skill and knowledge levels and various talent levels, because there was no application process if you could just like, again, like pay them. And, they're not like for profit in the way that, in my experience anyway, in the way that like they exploited us. Like there was real like legitimate resources there, and like the people that like, the instructors were great. And I think they were like fully digital, and they have been fully digital for a really long time. So that was a really nice thing for me to not only shoot on 16 millimeter, but like cut my own films on a Steenbeck, like a 6-plate Steenbeck. Like that really also was instrumental in forming me as an editor, because I like have since edited all my own stuff. And, partially indie filmmakers do that out of necessity, because it does save so much money if you can edit your own films. But it also informs how you shoot and how you visualize and how you like run your set, right? Because you're shooting for the edit, and I think if I didn't know how to do that stuff, I would just be like a worse writer director, because I wouldn't really understand that part of the process so firsthand and so critically. Like I'm thinking about the edit when I even before I like start writing something, I'm like, well, does this idea cut together like with the images in my head?
And you are absolutely the last of the last. You are the last generation that got to experiment with film and cut physical film, right, cut a work print on a flatbed and stuff. Which I mean, obviously, I'm from that world, and all the editors I grew up, knew in my younger life, all said, and I think they actually were proven wrong, but they all said that bad things would happen with the art of editing when it became 100% digital. But there was a discipline you learned editing the old way that
Yeah.
that no one else will ever get.
Well, like it's a different kind of stakes, right? Like you had to be a lot more intentional in the way that like when analog photographers would shoot on film, you have to be a lot more discerning, because really that stuff is not only ephemeral, it's like a limited resource. If you fuck up your print, you have to get that struck again, or like your negative, you can't cut your negative up so much that like you lose like the integrity of like what you shot. Whereas like, the undo button in Final Cut or, Premiere is endless.
Yeah, and digitally you can do 20 versions. Doesn't matter. You don't have to commit to anything. I
Right.
mean, you were committing to every cut when you used actual physical film.
Well,
And
and you have to be dexterous, like you have to be physically dexterous about it, right? Because when you are like, literally taping those two strips of film together, there is a way that you can just like fumble that. So like, it's a really obvious edit, right? Like you could literally see the tape if you don't like put it on there properly.
for sure. But also I'm sure it extended to shooting on film too, right? Because Lord knows, especially in the indie world, there was such a difference when you would be shooting on film and like everyone knew the cost per foot of 16 and 35 and maybe even 8 millimeter. And like you couldn't just roll and roll and roll. Like digital, you can have three cameras and never stop them. When you actually had to pay for the film and then to develop the film and then to print the film to edit it, every second costs more money. Like totally
Oh,
different
absolutely.
thing.
Yeah, no, what did I think the 16 millimeter rolls, I don't remember the footage, like the actual like length they were, but we had about 2.5 minutes, 2:45 to shoot on each roll, which is insane, like an insane like limitation to have.
It's funny. For some reason, 90 feet per minute is stuck in my head, uh, but my head is also in its late 50s, so maybe it's wrong. So I won't, but I'm 90 feet per minute might be what 35 millimeter is. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean, I'm not here to dispute you. My memory isn't what it used to be either, so
for
we're
sure.
two
But so
peas in a pod.
very cool that you got that experience. And did you say that was like in between junior and senior year, something like that?
Yeah, yeah, it was exactly. It was somewhere. Yeah, it must
So
have
going to
been.
New York must have been kind of amazing after being in South Florida.
Oh, it was so cool. Yeah, I was like, and also going to school in Tallahassee, like, you know, going off to college opened up my world in the same way that it opens up anybody's world, like leaving home and trying to live on your own as someone who's like barely an adult, and then going to New York from there and having to like not just like figure out how that lifestyle works, albeit temporarily, but like, the just the difference in like the cost of like a meal from like, nowhere in Florida, basically. I mean, Tallahassee's like the second biggest city, I think, in Florida. Maybe not. It is the capital. I don't remember like, the actual scale of it, but the cost of things back then, like, my rent in Tallahassee for like a 1 bedroom apartment was like $400, I think, a month. And then going to a place like New York and having to like budget on the limited amount of like money that like my parents could like afford to give me while I was there, on top of like paying for this like, temporary education, and then like learning, like trying to figure out how to like make legitimate films, and how to, schedule things I've never scheduled before, and like how to like find locations, and like, cops like telling us to like fuck off in the park, like we can't shoot there, just all those things. Yeah, it was crazy. It was like a really like it was another world.
Yeah, and I'll add, go boy, I'm being full nostalgia mode so far because also what a lot of people don't realize is going guerrilla in air quotes, like guerrilla filmmaking was way fucking harder when were you shooting on film and your equipment's bigger and bulkier and more noticeable. Like there was no way to be subtle back in those days. Like it was not like holding a little digital camera and like you could just be like recording your niece playing at the, you know
Or a
what I mean? Like
smartphone,
so different back then.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Now you could just act like you're, a tourist with your phone, shooting on your iPhone 16, and you could be using cinema mode and like legitimately making a movie. You could be like Sean Baker, shooting an entire like slash amazing movie on an iPhone.
Everyone has a DCI compliant digital video camera in their pocket. It's amazing.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's really come a long way. All right, so you come back. So sounds like the New York Film School experience was fantastic, and then you return for your final year. And did you come back and grab those artistic friends and keep working, or you had to turn your attention back to studies till you finished?
Yeah, I was doing the art thing, and sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Oh yeah, almost got a minor in art history, but I didn't want to stay another semester. But like, yeah, it really just kind of informed my studio art work from there because it did get more cinematic. It did get like a little more focused. I felt more confident in certain like tastes and predilections I had creatively. And it, informed the way that I like watched movies moving forward and like the type of movies that like I chose to watch because, it's not like I wasn't immersed and had available like interesting things to me before, but like I was also like in New York at the Film Academy. Not only did they show us really cool, challenging things, but like on our downtime, like me and the other like students, like the ones I connected with, would go and like take the train to like small art houses like elsewhere in New York, and like we saw like Stanley Kubrick's first film which was a short about like a boxer, and it was like super cool and like um very educational in that way, but also like I was just having different types of conversations with these kids who also had the same kind of passion for wanting to make movies, but also like had different perspectives. Were like bringing different like perspectives and lived experiences to these conversations that we were having when we were like talking about movies and seeing movies and like getting to explore like movies in like, like the arguable like, art house like capital of the world, basically.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I can admit it as a native Angelino that LA is we have our house, but not like New York does. It's a whole different vibe because we're so dominated by the industry here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have nothing but love for Los Angeles, so no shade, but I mean, like, yeah, fucking New York is Scorsese town, it's Jarmusch town, it's Spike Lee town. It really like, its credentials are unimpeachable in that regard.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you found your tribe there, which always matters.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Or at least the kind of like, crew I could hope to have slash want, moving forward.
All right, so after you graduate from FSU, what was your next step? Did you hightail? Obviously, at some point you end up in Chicago, but I don't know how long it took.
Yeah, for sure. Jeff, we are like, you're slightly gonna edit this for when it's published, right? Because I just need a quick bio break. I just need to run to the bathroom. Is that
And we're back from the bathroom break. No worries. Always happy to do it. Uh, so where were we? I think I was asking you post graduation and where you went and how long it took you to get to Chicago.
Yeah, yeah. So I, just from those like several weeks in New York, fell in love with it, wanted to be a New York filmmaker in the way that so many of us do in our early 20s. I still love New York. I still love the chaos and the energy and like just really all that it has to offer. But what happened was like, as you know, it's like a really expensive place to live and try and cut your teeth. So after Florida, it was easier to move to Chicago, and I thought I was just going to be there temporarily as sort of like, a launch pad to then go to New York. Because my parents who had originally lived in Chicago before I was born, and then moved to Florida where I was born, had since moved back to Chicago, like the Chicago suburbs. And I was like, okay, well, I did what every, undergrad, recent grad did. I just moved back in with my parents, but I had access to Chicago. And Chicago, like, as a world-class city, much like New York, had similar offerings, just like with that Midwest flavor. So I really got to continue my cinematic education by going to like the Music Box and the Landmark, and Chicago filmmakers had some really interesting screenings, and I interned with them. That was like my first volunteer gig, when I left college. And so I continued to be exposed to like interesting, creative, cultural things, but also found a community in Chicago that I did not expect, you know, based on my lack of exposure and like literally just kind of being a cultural bumpkin from someone who like lived only in Florida at the time. And really just like was able to, I mean, everything was so much more and still is so much more accessible here, arguably, than New York City. And so like I just like found my tribe here. I, started making little things and, making connections and going to events and meeting people. And like, it took me a while to like, I did get my first sort of like commissioned indie film gig maybe like a year and a half after I moved here, but it would be some time before that before I started sort of like, I don't know, becoming a familiar name in the community. And but once that happened, like through the support of like friends and admirers of like what I was trying to do, it really helped me take the next step and feel confident in the things I was doing, because then I started getting programmed at like local film festivals here and that kind of thing, and seeing how people reacted, like how actual audiences reacted and the things they would say to you during Q&As really empowered me to keep going in the direction that I thought I wanted to go in. And like, it's really obviously, this is like an obvious statement, but Chicago has shaped who I am and who I've become as a filmmaker. I'm like a Midwest filmmaker through and through. And when I go to festivals elsewhere, they're just like, yeah, we fucking love Chicago. You guys make like crazy shit, and you're not really like bound by like the sort of like ethos of different geographic creative communities, And so while we have a uniqueness to it, we do have like a Midwest sort of filmmaking brand as well, where we're all like very different, but like I think it's to the initiated, folks can tell when one of us is fucking about in the Midwest. So
and I think I have a memory of us discussing this for the Pretty Pickle Q&A back in June 2023. But we heck, we're about to show a couple more Chicago films in 3 weeks at Sherman Oaks Film Festival, and I think I said something to you along the lines of there's sort of a punk rock ethos. I obviously, as a kid of the 80s, I lean towards terms like punk rock, but it's people in that Chicago film community, if they haven't moved to LA, they haven't moved to New York, they really are more about the work and the art than, they haven't decided, I really need to see my name in lights. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's
no. I think it may not be fair for every single person here, but I do remember our conversation. I still agree that we do have a punk rock ethos, and I definitely align with that. Like guerrilla DIY, like my first films were so rough, and I didn't care because also like mumblecore, like came out of Chicago when I was trying to make movies. And so that really inspired me to like make movies for basically like with nothing, for nothing, and just like try and push an interesting idea across like in through any means possible. And yeah, I do think even though we have like a very strong like commercial foundation here, and just a strong arts community, there is really just like, this third coast energy of just like we're just gonna do it the way that we want to do it, and like no one's really pressuring us to be a certain way. Like I've been on the programming side as well, like not at a festival of your scale, but also I've been a screener for like fairly big festivals, and I have seen enough also as a a festival participant, like I can tell when there's a New York film. I can usually tell when there's an LA film. You know, I can tell like a Canadian film, and like again, that's like not a dig, but like it's just. I think you know that's simply to say that like you know geographically there's like you know people are drinking the same type of water, and like the same goes for Chicago, where like you know there might be a same vibe to our vibe, but there's still like a diversity within that community. You know.
All right, and I started hearing an echo on your voice. So I'm pausing for a second. Maybe we'll get that fixed. But yeah, well, but and everybody, whether they like it or not, is a product of their time and their environment. You know, you even if it causes you to go against what's common in your environment, yeah, no one creates in isolation. So you mentioned some rough films. How how many shorts in the Chicago era came before Pretty Pickle?
Many shorts.
Or any film, like, you know, like were you happy with what you were working on and you know just staying busy and you know just trying to get a feel. I don't know if Pretty Pickle is like the third thing you've made or the seventh.
Yeah, so you know that's an interesting question because there is a fair amount of work, you know, a fair amount of shorts and like video experiments and very pretentious, just little video things here and there that I've certainly made that I can't relate to as someone who's like been doing this for 20 years. You know, I'm 20 years older than when I first started making things with any kind of regularity. So like the scripts and the little experiments back then, like, you know, they can take me back to where I was mentally, but like I'm certainly not that person. So there's definitely like, you know, that kind of work that I don't consider like my work. And so, you know, fast forward to many, many years later and you know, having tried at this point to get feature films off the ground, but also having a lot of like film festival play. Because what happened, I think, God, in like 2011, I think I made my first, I think, quote unquote, real short film with a beginning, middle, and end that I wrote. And, you know, it was like a crew of like three people and two wonderful actors who are not professionally trained, who just like gave it their all. And so very rough by, you know, any standards, and definitely by my own personal standards now, but it got a lot of festival play. And so I, you know, was just like maxing out my credit cards, like, as this like 31-year-old know nothing, you know, with a dream, going to all the festivals and meeting people. And so by the time Pretty Pickle came along, 11 years later, you know, like, which was just 2 years ago, at this point, I was established, much more established in a lot of ways. You know, like by the time Pretty Pickle was like in the process of being made, like I had been written up a couple times in a local magazine here, like as part of their like Film 50 of Chicago, because after this movie called Drift that I made when I was 31, I followed it up with like this really weird 70s horror movie that also a lot of people really liked. And Drift was not a horror movie in any way, but making the follow-up Violets in 2014 really, I think, cemented for me that I was going to start doing genre stuff. And then after that, my follow-up was this movie that I made for about like 9 or 10K, most of which I crowdfunded. And I had like a very prominent fetish model, like an alternative fetish model, Cam Damage, in it. And I made that in 2017. And that also kind of not only boosted my my visibility as well. But it's sort of like, again, informed like kind of the psychosexual direction I was going in, like the weird, subversive, like it'll make you uncomfortable, but you can't really like call me out on like doing things irresponsibly or unethically, like as like, a cis then like man who identified as heterosexual, like eventually, becoming like the cis like queer filmmaker that I am now, I think there was a certain trajectory, but yeah, I mean, by the time I wrote the script in 2021 for Pretty Pickle, which like I wrote the first draft in 2 hours because I was so like just completely inspired by this weird idea in my head that I couldn't shake that I like wrote. By that point, I had the support of like the guy who is now my ride or die cinematographer, Chris Rahano, who's, done things like, he shot those really like amazing Chicago foggy shots in the 2019 Candyman movie, right? And he's like shot a lot of Jennifer Reeder's stuff and does that kind of thing. When I showed it to him, he was just like, yeah, we got to do this. And I will basically like make sure you have like the best camera and electric crew, that I know from the commercial and feature film world behind you. And it was just a matter of like me figuring out how to like work with a bigger crew and execute something that like still to this day I think is the closest to my vision of anything that I've made. So sorry, I am not hearing. Are you there?
Sorry. I was asking. He became your ride or die cinematographer. Uh, was that actually like an effect that you worked with him on one of your earlier shorts, and then he found that later, and he stayed loyal to you essentially?
I had a feature film under option with a local production company here for a few years, leading up to when Pretty Pickle was made. So he was attached to that because he was so into the idea of the feature and because he had shot the previous three features for this production company that the producers just paired me with him essentially. Like they didn't force him upon me, but like they were literally like, you guys are like crazy, like Filipino, like similarly aged, like filmmakers. So you should at least meet. And, we had a phone call during lockdown during the pandemic. And like, we found out we had like very similar tastes and very similar instincts and just like got along famously. And so he was, he's still attached to direct this feature that like we haven't like been able to finance yet. But that was the first time we actually got to make something together.
Very cool. All right. Well, actually, the other thing I wanted to hone in on, if you don't mind, is you gave a brief description there, and I'm going to quote you wrong, but you said something along the lines of you said, being a cisgendered filmmaker, and then you added in, queer perspectives and things like. Do you want to go a little further into that? Because I know we talked about in the past, that Pretty Pickle is challenging and that not everyone can take it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. I'm not like skirting the issue. I think the fact of the matter is like as my own creative and personal identity that I identify as a queer filmmaker now, whereas at the time that Pretty Pickle was made, I did not. I still felt like I was more on the heterosexual spectrum of things. And so I think that the maybe the most like pertinent way to address that is that Pretty Pickle really does deal with like heteronormative insecurity from a man's perspective, and not even just a man, but like kind of a man child or an adult boy, if you will. Like here's a person who's like not really experienced. The character, our protagonist Samuel, he is not really emotionally intelligent enough to communicate with this person with whom he's in a new relationship, and he lets his insecurities and lack of I think lack of just sort of care get the better of him, right? Because
Yeah,
it
and
is
lack
sort
of
of this
respect for his partner in a
Othelian.
way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is like, we don't have like these simple answers, right? Because when you're in the honeymoon period and like all you really do is like have surface level discussions and then like have a ton of sex, it is really difficult to like ask hard questions of another person or address challenging things, for fear of disrupting like a good thing, right? One of the most poignant reviews, I think, of this film was by a a critic who identifies as a woman, and they were just like, really, this movie exists, and the movie like culminates in the way that it does because like it's very authentic in its representation of like the lengths a man will go to like continue having like sex with someone, including like not questioning these like red or yellow flags or being able to talk about like even the most like, infinitesimally challenging or disruptive thing. So
That is a very perceptive review. Wow. Well, excellent. And it sounds like it was very well received. Did you have a really good festival run with it?
yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think it was at 36 festivals. It got like 15 award nominations. It won like three or four of those. And now it's on director's notes. And so like that is like a really exclusive sort of streaming site out of the UK that like really, wants to program award winning films. And like I was really excited how supportive they too were of this, because they're just like, yeah, it's like an award winning film. So we like that, but also it's like an insane film and we want to talk to you about it. And so they did a really like beautiful, like respectful write up of that. And I got to say a lot of like things that I have always wanted to say about the film, like in a very like, much more on paper journalistic fashion. But it's also, it tends to like pop up here and there as well. Like it's playing at Days of the Dead in Chicago next weekend, and I'm not going to be here for it. But it's funny because like people will still just be like, we know it's online, and now it's going to be like on Indie Channel, but like also like people like tend to just want to bring it back. I also almost got it to play as a short before Necromantic on Valentine's Day, which I was super bummed didn't happen like from a scheduling perspective, but like that would have been like a nice little bucket list thing. So
For sure. It's always well, as a festival programmer, after our first year, I put down the rule we'll never again put a short in front of a feature because it's just, oh, that poor short filmmaker has to wait for 90 minutes to talk about their work. But that situation where you're paired with the perfect complement, that would be very cool.
yeah, no, I really understand the logic behind your programming, and that is certainly an exception. Just didn't come to fruition, but
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, and as a creative, are you? I assume you're writing all the time. Are you always? Do you have a, you know, the proverbial book notebook of story ideas that you're always wondering which one will take over?
yeah, I'm such an undisciplined writer, and I am so bad at structure, but like really I think my strength is, the ideas I come up with, they're not all gems, but really when I like key in on something, I can run with it. And I'm just so happy and lucky enough to be partnered with co-writers that are so much more talented with structure and like really bringing things home that I have been able to write and complete, like co-write, really like wonderful features and a TV pilot that I'm proud of. Due in large part to my co-writers Shelley Gustafson and Lily Park, respectively, to Chicago screenwriters and like limited series writers who have partnered with me on various ideas. And so those are kind of the bigger things I have in development right now. Shelley and I adapted a queer body horror novella that is pretty popular in indie circles called Waif, written by my friend Samantha Koliesnik, who was the one who like gave me her blessing / invited me to direct the thing. And Samantha and I wrote a first draft for the second round, Sundance Labs. And, we wrote it so quickly and so hastily, and we didn't end up getting in. But then, she gave Shelley and I her blessing for us to sort of like adapt it. And so the final draft of that is currently in development. We have attached like a very cool producer from the established indie genre world, who I cannot name just yet, but like things are getting very exciting with that project. And at the same time, the limited series that I co-created with Lily Park, we had a first look deal with Warner Brothers, and they gave us development money. And so we were able to shoot a proof of concept that, I co-wrote and directed, again, shot by my go-to cinematographer, Chris Rajano. We got to shoot it in Chicago. And so we have a pilot script for that original series and a proof of concept that is being sort of like taken around as we speak. And so that's also very exciting.
Yeah, so it sounds like you definitely have your eye on moving beyond the world of shorts to a feature.
Yeah, the features and TV land as well, and always with the same kind of brand. Like I am really like mired in the dark shit and the psychosexual shit. So like, you see something like The Substance and how amazing it is that like a body horror movie of that level of subversion and how challenging it is and how much of it is an indictment of like our culture is like so big now. Like who'd have thunk that like you'd have like a Demi Moore and a Dennis Quaid and that kind of thing, and it would be so popular and so immediately seen. And so it feels right for kind of doing something like Waif that is also a subversive body horror and one of a queer nature as well. And then also this limited series, or, maybe not limited series, but just continuing series called Argus that is a sort of like a modern update of 70s neo-noirs. And so, yeah, we're also, Lily and I are really excited about that as well.
Funny, I guess this is my insecurity, but I just have to mention that, like, I said to myself as a fan of the unconventional, and I've already mentioned punk rock ethos, and I mean, fuck, we're talking 9 days after an election,
Yes.
I was a kid of the '80s, and punk rock, where I'm from, was a reaction to the Reagan era, and when we had that first Trump administration, I thought, well, punk rock's coming back now. And I guess the music business, I don't know. It didn't reach me if it happened. But when you mentioned what you mentioned about psychosexual horror and body horror and stuff, and I realized you just made me realize that stories like The Substance are probably a reaction to the blatant sexism and other things that at least part of the people in our culture have become more cleanly. They've thrust it in our faces, right? At this point, so there's no choice but to react. So maybe the punk rock reaction is in the horror world.
I really think so, right? Because like, I was just having this conversation earlier that like, no shade against Barbie. I think Greta Gerwig is great, but I feel like the messaging of Barbie, like you said, 9 days into the second, Trump presidency or president elect, you know, um, however you would word that, 9 days post, second Trump election, I guess is the way to put it. You think of Barbie and you think about like how just like 2 summers ago, we thought we were there, right? We thought we were there in this like utopian mainstream feminist world. And clearly a lot of us, not myself, but a lot of us have like other fucking like awful, horrendous, toxic, like devolved puritanical ideas about, not just women, but transgender people, queer people, non-binary people, anyone really who isn't like a cis straight white person, of a certain class, is a target. And not to even really address what's going on in other parts of the world, but really, yeah, we're just in way worse shape that we thought we were. And so, yeah, I think the substance is like a very interesting answer to like the very recent like Barbie idealism. You know,
And
just like,
I mean, and I can't help but, well, we should wrap this up. But and so bringing up politics, it's a really bad idea when you're trying to wrap something.
yeah,
But
for sure, yeah,
I'll add that I'm just say the Republican Party's belief is the main value of a woman is her appearance, and every candidate they put up for election is actually, you can tell that it's that woman's appearance why they're putting her up, and not her mind and not her beliefs. Not they, it's a very. I mean, I guess it is what it is, and Barbie, came from the other side, but is still somewhat guilty of that. I mean, Barbie as a film, Greta Gerwig, they tried to forgive it by having a narrator turn to the camera and say, if you wanted to make a point, casting your lead wasn't so good, but
right.
we were supposed to forgive the whole conceit on that one line that they said, But anyway, yeah, yeah. I'm glad that films like The Substance are coming out, and yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. And I certainly look forward to you getting to pursue your work more.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, we're just like two dudes talking, right? So for the record, I am not anti Barbie at all. I think the fact that that's available to young women and young boys, and the youth of anyone who does not identify as either, like still like a really great thing to have, right? I just when you talk about the spectrum of things and ideology, that was simply just comparing it to The Substance in terms of like maybe trying to draw correlations between like where we thought we were and where we actually were. It's just a little bit of a rude awakening scenario. So
For sure. And I mean, I'm comfortable with what I've said about the Barbie film. I certainly loved it, and I took our kid to see it. And but I do admit that well, whatever. My only reaction, well, whatever. Who cares what I thought of Barbie? But I did have one point about Barbie that I made to everyone I knew. I said, I am glad that it made all that money, because I don't like the Tom Cruise films, and it's okay that they make $1 billion. And I wasn't a huge fan of Barbie, and I'm glad it made $1 billion for those people. Like, I'm just, if they were whatever, I'll shut up. All right, so needless to say, do you want to? Is there somewhere social media or website people should go to check out you and your work?
Yeah, I don't know how long I'll be on Twitter, so let's just not even drop my Twitter handle. But like, I think primarily JimVendiola.com, my first name, my last name is one word.com is, probably where you're going to get the official me / the sort of more official read on my work, and people can contact me through the web form on there. And if you want a little more of weird day-to-day me, that is somewhat personal, but also very much professionally geared, in my film and sort of TV endeavors. I'm mostly on Instagram, also at Jim Vendiola. First name, last name is one word. I don't mess with Facebook these days. People can find me, same handle, on Letterboxd if you want to hear my bad takes on, movies that other people have made. I tend not to do any kind of takes on Letterboxd, to be honest, because I try to maintain, as someone who makes film, I don't think criticism is a bad thing. I just think my own personal criticism is potentially a bad thing. Because I also know how fucking hard it is to make movies, right? I don't feel the need to be super snarky about someone's movie who's perceived as a failure. But I do like to track my viewing habits on there. So I do think Letterboxd is a fun thing to connect on as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, we don't need snark. And then, of course, the irony there is I'm about to ask you questions about your favorite films and things, but it's mostly about praise and interest and just exposing people to more cinema. So I will get us out of here with my closing spiel, which is, by the way, Jim's the website and whatnot. We'll make those clickable links in the show notes. So if you're listening and you want to check it out, just go to the show notes on whatever podcast app you are using and hop over to JimVendiola.com. But thank you, Jim, for doing this. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to learn more about this podcast or the TV series that was born from it, go to discoverindiefilm.com, and on social media, it's always at DIFWins. I, too, don't even have the Twitter app anymore, and I know it syncs, I believe, but I think it syncs with Instagram somehow. Somehow, stuff ends up there anyway, but yeah, I lost interest in that, actually, even before the takeover. But anyway, and I mentioned that Pretty Pickle played at Film Invasion Los Angeles last year. You can learn more about that festival that we hold every June. It's just go to filminvasionla.com, and it's at filminvasionla on social media. Its sister festival that we hold every December is Sherman Oaks Film Festival, and you can learn about that one at shermanoaksff.com, and it's at Sherman Oaks FF on social media. And finally, yes, the Indie Channel, the other thing born, honestly, directly out of this podcast, just talking to people who make shorts and features independently, mostly out of their own pockets, and just thinking of ways to try to get them the audiences they deserve. That's what the Indie Channel is. So if you go to indiechannel.tv, or if you go to your Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Android TV, or your smartphone, and you download the Indie Channel app, by subscribing, you are actually supporting well over 100 indie filmmakers. So, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to support artists. What can I say? All right. Jim, thank you.
Thank
My
you.
laughter is solely self-directed, that here I am begging people to support the arts, but that's a
it's
I'm happy to live on.
It's cheaper than one iced coffee a month, right?
Yeah, it's $5.99 a month.
Yeah, so you can't beat that.
And if you're a bargain hunter, it's $59.99 a year, so that's only $5 a month. That's less than $5 a month. And it is whatever. It is a social. It is, even while it is losing money. We don't. One of the big lies that people, profit sharing is the big lie in film distribution, right? And the Indie Channel does not share profits. It shares gross receipts with the filmmakers. So even though the Indie Channel is losing money every month, every quarter, the filmmakers are receiving a payment of half of the gross receipts because I refuse to be involved in one of those things where you deduct every one of your costs first and then you make up costs that don't exist and then you share, because that's the con that indie filmmakers have been dealing with my entire adult life and probably before I was born.
Yeah, no, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate that, because now you're in the same boat as the filmmakers, just losing money on your dream the way we lose money on our dreams. So
good point.
I appreciate that, comrade.
Right on. Agreed. All right. Well, thank you, Jim. And thank you, everyone, for listening.